Hey, friends. I want to welcome you to the very first episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. So, grab yourself a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let's have a conversation for a few minutes. My name is Al Weeks, and I've spent a lot of years in pulpits and classrooms and coffee shops, having real conversations about life, faith, God. And the one thing that I've learned is that most people, myself included, are not looking for polished theology or pithy little special phrases that we can hang on our refrigerator magnets. We're looking for real faith that will be useful for us in the midst of our mess, in our brokenness, and our frustrations. And that's kind of what this whole podcast is all about. It's about having a conversation about grounded theology and how to make it applicable to our everyday lives. So, in this introductory episode, I thought maybe we could just have a conversation about my brain and why I came up with this name and what our plan going forward is going to be. Well, the name Grace, Grit, and Grounds. That's where it begins. And the very first name, the first part of that name is grace. And grace is the heart of the gospel. It's the unearned, unmerited favor of God that makes broken people whole. It's the tool that God uses to draw us into himself and to elevate us to a place that we never thought we could possibly go to. And here's the thing, grace always shows up in the most messiest of places. And then comes to the second part. Grit. I love grit. Grit is that resilience. It's that part of our faith. Actually, in many ways, it's the most important part of our faith that isn't lived in stained glass cathedrals. It's forged in hospital rooms, in hard conversation, in moments when we wonder if God is really listening to us in that moment. Like we're in the midst of going through the most horrific part of our life, and we're just wanting to know, God, are you there? This is where grit comes in. This is where the essence of faith really is, because faith takes grit and resilience. And that comes to the last part of the title, which is grounds. I'll be honest, I love coffee, and I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about coffee. This particular podcast is not sponsored by any coffee companies or anything like that. I'm just an avid fan and an avid drinker of coffee. And we're going to have conversations about it, around it. And I like the idea of what coffee implies, especially coffee houses. For me, I like to sip my coffee slow. I don't like to chug it down just so I can get the caffeine in my body so I can go, go, go. I'm looking for an opportunity to sit and enjoy a good cup of coffee. There's nothing greater than waking up early in the morning as the sun is starting to rise, having a fresh brewed pot of good coffee and being able to grab that and stepping out onto the back porch and just watching the sunrise, taking a sip and enjoying God's creation. I could do that every morning for the rest of my life and it still wouldn't be enough. See, coffee is the ideal medium having these kinds of conversations. And I think it's important we look at it because this idea about faith and grace and love and mercy and all the things that we're going to talk about in the course of this podcast isn't abstract thoughts or ideas. It's again not things that we're going to sit on our shelf of true theology. It's something that we're going to pull off and use on a regular basis. And I think that's the most important thing about this is that real Christian life isn't in the abstract. It's in the break rooms, in the kitchens. It's around kitchen tables and coffee shops that where these conversations are had. It's in back porches, it's in garages, it's underneath cars as you're changing the oil. It's those kinds of places where we can have true, honest, authentic conversations about who God is and why he loves us so much. And that's kind of what I wanted to do because sometimes the best conversations we can have are shared over a really good cup of coffee. So let's just dive right into it. Let's talk for a minute about grace. See, you're going to hear me say this phrase a lot in the course of our conversations together, and that is that honestly, grace is for messy places. If you've ever thought my life is too complicated, My life is too messy, that I need to get things fixed before God can really do anything with me because honestly, I'm way too complicated even for God. Sometimes you might even think that I'm a bit too scarred on the inside. Maybe my life is too tangled up and messy. If you've ever had those thoughts, I have good news for you. Grace is at its absolute best in the middle of our mess. I've had a lot of good conversations with people over the years. And I remember once sitting with a man who had lost pretty much everything that was holding him together. He lost his family, his job, his reputation. He honestly thought that the moment in his life he was beyond redemption. And it was in that space, in that rubble of his life, in that shipwreck, if you want to mix the metaphors that he had made of his life, he was asking me real questions like, can God really forgive me? I had to say, yes, God will. I had to say that his grace was bigger than our messes. And I remember sitting there and having that conversation with him. And I don't know if he ever fully embraced the ideas that I was giving because sometimes when you're in the middle of those traumatic moments, you're not really listening so much as you're just spewing. But I have to say that after the conversation was over with, he did walk away with a deeper understanding of God's grace and his love. And that's important because, like that individual, myself included, I know that a lot of us carry around wounds, spiritual, emotional, mental. Some of these wounds are church related. Many people have struggled inside and outside the church. And maybe if you're like me, people might have used Jesus himself and his words as a weapon against you. And if that resonates with you, if you're sitting there and you're thinking, how did you know? I want you to know, and I want you to understand this very clearly. You're not crazy. And most importantly, you're not alone. This is the space that I want to have those honest conversations. I'm not interested in glossing over pain, trauma, struggles with a cheesy Bible verse, patting you on the back and say Jesus is gonna be all you need, and then turning around and walking away. I want to have honest conversations because I think true healing, which is what God offers all of us, begins with honesty. Honest with ourselves, honest with our friends, honest with our pastors, honest with our closest individuals in our lives. And I think it's important that we ask the big questions that are on our heart and mind, the ones that maybe we're afraid to ask in Sunday school class or small group, or maybe we just don't really want to ask because we don't want to know those answers. I think we need to ask them, and we need to understand in the very beginning is that God is not afraid of our questions. None of them. There is not a single question we can ask that either A, he doesn't know about, or B, that he's afraid of. This is the beginning of this journey, this conversation we're going to have. Um, I love the idea of spiritual formation because I think it leads to true growth in our Christian walk. But as soon as I say those words, spiritual formation, already we're diving back into that theology mode again. We're no longer thinking in the straight, the honest, the authentic, the day to day. We're now looking at the abstract. We're now stepping into a Sunday school class where we have to put on that special mask that says we've got everything together. We know what we're talking about. We're spiritual. We're focused. We're doing good, and life is fantastic. And we love Jesus all the time as we say it, as our soul is basically has its teeth gritted, and we're wondering if we're just going to be able to make it to the next hour. It's those times that we really need spiritual formation. You see, faith is a journey. It begins every day when we wake up, and it walks with us step by step everywhere we go. This is the most important part about our journey is It doesn't have to be fast. It can be slow. Sometimes it can stall out, but every step counts. Over time, God is shaping us. He's conforming us. He's drawing us into himself. He's conforming us to the image of his own son. He does this through scripture, through prayer, through our community, through our churches, sometimes through our trials and frustrations and tribulations, even the ones that we have caused ourselves, even the ones that we would never want to have, but we're stuck in the middle of it. That's kind of what this podcast is all about. It's kind of what we're going to lean into is how do we keep going even when life is pulling us in every direction imaginable? I have spent quite a bit of time talking about this, thinking about it. A couple years ago, I wrote a book entitled Walking the Jericho Road. It's an interesting book, and I'm sure I'm going to talk about it in future podcasts, but it's a book about that road that we're all traveling. It comes from a very old phrase that most of us, my age and younger, probably doesn't even recognize or remember. It's a concept that was part of our cultural history in the 50s and the 40s and the 30s when our fathers and grandfathers and grandparents themselves understood when I would say, well, he's just walking the Jericho Road. Well, yeah, it means he's walking through a time of trials and frustrations. And in that book, I wrestled with the idea of walking that road. And I've come to the conclusion that God is with us every step of the way. I know that we say that. I don't know if we really believe it. He's with us when we're taking our steps forward. He's with us when we sidle sideways. He's with us when we stop because we can't take another step for a season. He's even with us when we take some steps backwards because, again, every step counts. This isn't going to be the sugar-coated Christianity kind of podcast and show. I'm not here to sell you a shiny faith that ignores reality. I'm here, again, for honest, unvarnished conversations, the kind that we may have over a table in a coffee shop when you're tired or hopeful, when you're still searching for where God is in the middle of all of your mess. Well, that's where we are. And yes, we're going to open the Bible together, but I don't want you to worry. I'm not going to drown you in Greek and Hebrew every week. My goal is to take the richness of Scripture and bring it down to ground level where we can walk with it every day of our lives. And I think that at times like this, as we're beginning this journey together, I want to take a moment to just give you a bit of a story. Years ago, I sat beside a young man who was dying. He walked into the hospital on his own 2 feet. He spent 3 months there, and I watched him waste away. And I listened to him ask real questions about God, faith, grace, mercy. This was an individual who didn't have a clue who God was, but he was closer to seeing God than anyone I've ever met, and he knew it. And he was asking some of the deep questions about how do I step out of this life and into eternity with confidence. He was asking me questions that were raw, like, can God really love me even though I've done what I've done? Does grace really reach me? I think in those moments, I realized that all the books on my shelf, all the study that I've done in seminary, all the things that I have tried to put together in great sounding sermons, none of that mattered at that moment. Only grace did. And that's when I think I fully embrace the idea that true theology isn't for the lecture hall, the pulpit. for the seminary halls and libraries. It's for hospital rooms and dinner tables. It's for you right where you are now in the middle of your mess. It's in the middle of my life and my mess too. That's the heart of Grace Grit and Grounds. It's having honest conversations about grace in messy places. It's about healing from hurt. It's about spiritual growth and honest faith. It's about seeking answers in scripture and actually applying them to our real life in our real world. My prayer is that this space that we're creating will be a place that we can breathe deep, have a good solid sip of coffee, and wrestle with honest faith and keep growing, keep moving forward. If any of this resonates with you, I encourage you to hit subscribe, to follow this journey, because I don't want you to miss a single episode of what's going to come next. If you know somebody that needs a bit of grace, and maybe this episode might be the beginning steps for them, I encourage you to send this link to them. I would encourage you even to drop into the comments questions, ideas, thoughts that you might have, because the best conversation is one that's had two ways. That we might truly be able to step into this space comfortably, authentically, and together. So until next time, I encourage you to keep the coffee hot, the faith real, and remember, God's grace is big enough for your mess, your questions, and your journey.